Were you staring or just pretending to look at the ocean? She asked, holding her shirt against the wind. I should have apologized. Instead, I laughed, and that moment changed everything. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, have you ever had a message that changed your life? And where are you watching from? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real emotional stories. Let's begin. My name is Ethan Parker, and if you had looked at my life from the outside back then, you probably would have said I was doing fine. I lived in a small coastal town on the Oregon shore, in a second-floor apartment just 4 blocks from the ocean. I worked for myself as a freelance designer, which sounded impressive enough when people asked at coffee shops or over forced small talk. I could say things like flexible schedule, independent clients, creative freedom. What I never said was that most days I felt less like a free man and more like a hostage with good Wi-Fi. I had moved there thinking the ocean might fix something in me. That sounds stupid now, but I believed it at the time. I thought if I'd traded the city noise for sea air, if I lived somewhere with gulls overhead and salt in the wind and mornings that looked like postcards, then maybe I'd become the kind of man who actually enjoyed his life. Instead, I became the kind of man who answered emails at midnight while the sound of the waves drifted in through a cracked window he barely noticed. That was the truth of it. I lived near beauty and still acted like I was trapped in the basement. The woman next door was part of that half-lived life for months before I ever really knew her. Her name was Olivia Hayes, though back then she was just the polished neighbor with the straight posture, the clean apartment, and the kind of composed expression that made me feel like I'd missed some important class on how adulthood was supposed to work. I saw her in fragments, in the hallway with a canvas bag over one shoulder, carrying groceries in neat paper sacks, talking through the wall in a calm, clipped voice that sounded like she handled problems for a living. We had the usual neighbor relationship, small nods, quick elevator silences. Once she handed me a package that had been left by my door while I was out. "You looked busy," she'd said. I'd been standing there in a wrinkled t-shirt holding a fork over a carton of leftover noodles. "That obvious?" She gave me the smallest smile. "A little." Then the door shut, and that was that. Still, I noticed her more after that, not in some dramatic love-at-first-sight way, more because she seemed like someone who actually knew how to inhabit a place. Like she probably knew which bakery opened earliest, which seafood shack was worth the line, which evenings the pier hosted local music. Meanwhile, I knew which takeout place delivered fastest and which clients were most likely to ruin a Sunday. Then, one Thursday evening, I hit a wall so hard I just stared at my screen and realized I had read the same email 6 times without understanding a word of it. The sun outside had gone golden, the kind of soft April light people move across the country for, and I had this sudden, ugly thought. If I stay inside one more evening, I'm going to forget I'm a person. So I shut the laptop, grabbed my shoes, and walked to the beach. It wasn't magical. I wasn't healed by the sea breeze. I was still tired, still irritated, still mentally rewriting a client brief while stepping over driftwood. But at least I was outside, and at least the sky was wide enough to remind me my inbox wasn't the whole universe. The wind was stronger near the water, cool, restless, carrying that sharp, clean smell of salt and wet sand. I slipped my shoes off and started walking along the shore, letting the cold water catch my feet every few steps. That was when I saw her. Olivia was maybe 30 yards ahead, near a towel and an oversized beach bag, trying to pull a long shirt over her swimsuit. I only glanced once before looking away because it was none of my business and because she was clearly fighting the wind. But the wind had other plans. It caught the shirt at exactly the wrong second and turned the whole thing into a complete disaster. She made this sharp, frustrated sound, and I glanced back on instinct, even though I absolutely should not have. For one terrible second, Both of us knew I had seen more than any neighbor should ever see. I froze and snapped my head toward the ocean like I'd suddenly become a deeply thoughtful man studying wave patterns. "Oh no," I muttered to myself. I was already bracing for anger, for humiliation, for the kind of look that turns a man to ash where he stands. Instead, a few seconds later, I heard footsteps in the sand. I turned, prepared to apologize, and there she was, hair whipping across her face, cheeks red from wind and embarrassment, holding the shirt against herself with one arm. She looked at me like she was deciding whether to run, laugh, or bury herself alive. Then she said, "I need you to be honest. On a scale of 1 to catastrophic, how bad was that?" I blinked. "For you or for me?" There was a beat of silence. Then she laughed. Not politely, not tightly, a real laugh, surprised and helpless and human. It changed everything in an instant. The whole awkwardness of it was still there, but now it belonged to both of us. "For both of us," she said, shaking her head. "I may never recover. I'd like the record to show that I tried very hard to become interested in the horizon." She noticed. "Your commitment to that was actually kind of impressive." I have strong self-preservation instincts. That got another laugh out of her, and something about hearing it, out there with the wind tearing at both of us, with the sunset spilling pale gold over the water, made the moment feel less like a disaster and more like the first honest thing that had happened to me in months. She adjusted the shirt properly this time and exhaled. "Well," she said, "this is probably the weirdest possible way to introduce myself to the neighbor I've lived next to for 5 months. Still better than meeting while taking out trash," I said. "Debatable." I smiled despite myself. Then she held out her hand like we were in a normal situation, like this was not absurd at all. "Olivia." I took it. "Ethan." And standing there in the cold wind, with my dignity half gone and hers hanging by a thread, I had the strange feeling that something in my life had just shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to matter. For the first time since I'd moved to that town, the ocean didn't feel like scenery. It felt like the place where something had finally begun. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because my brain wouldn't let me sleep past the memory of that moment on the beach. For a few seconds, I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying it. The wind, the awkwardness, the way she'd laughed instead of shutting down or walking away. It didn't fit with the version of Olivia I had built in my head over months of quiet hallway encounters. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. "I survived the beach. Hope you did too." I stared at the message longer than I should have, then let out a quiet laugh. "Barely. I may never look at wind the same way again," I typed back. Her reply came almost instantly. "That's fair. Also, now that we've met in the worst possible way, hallway nods feel a little too formal." She was right. Something had shifted. We had skipped past the usual polite distance and landed somewhere real. That week, we started texting in the gaps between work. At first, it was light. Small complaints, screenshots of ridiculous client messages, the kind of conversations that didn't require energy, just recognition. "If one more person says circle back, I'm moving into the ocean," she wrote one afternoon. "I support this, but only if there's Wi-Fi," I replied. Exactly the problem. It was easy. That was the surprising part. Not forced, not strategic, just easy in a way that made the hours between messages feel shorter. By Friday evening, when she knocked on my door, it didn't feel strange at all. I opened it, expecting another misplaced package. Instead, Olivia stood there in jeans and a loose, dark sweater, holding her phone like she had just decided something. "I'm getting Thai food, and before you overthink it, this is not a complicated thing. It's just two people who refuse to eat over their keyboards." I glanced behind me at my desk, where I had absolutely planned to do exactly that. "Wow," I said. "You really do know me now." "Unfortunately, yes." 10 minutes later, we were sitting in a small corner restaurant with fogged-up windows and mismatched chairs. The air smelled like basil, lime, and something sizzling in the kitchen. It was warm, a little crowded, and just far enough removed from everything else to feel like a break from real life. What surprised me wasn't that we got along. It was how quickly the conversation dropped any kind of performance. There was no awkward searching for topics, no careful filtering. We were already past that somehow, like the beach had burned through the usual early-stage politeness. She told me about a client who wanted a human-centered campaign for an app that reminded wealthy people to drink water. "I'm serious," she said. "They called it a hydration journey." I put my fork down. "I would like to formally resign from society." She laughed, really laughed, and for a second had to look down at the table. Then I told her about a client who had offered me exposure and long-term alignment instead of actual payment. Her expression changed immediately. "No! I swear! Did you say no?" "I said my landlord hasn't embraced the spiritual economy yet." That got her again, and somewhere between trading stories, interrupting each other, and adding ridiculous details, something settled into place between us. Relief. That was the only word for it. Relief disguised as conversation. After dinner, neither of us suggested going home. We ended up walking toward the water with paper bags in our hands, the night air cooler now, the town quieter. The ocean was just a dark line ahead of us, steady and distant. At the edge of the sand, she slipped off her shoes and carried them in one hand. "I moved here because I thought living near the ocean would automatically make me a better person," she said, almost casually. I let out a short laugh. "That is exactly why I moved here." She glanced at me. "Seriously?" "Yeah, I thought scenery would fix burnout." She looked out toward the water, the wind catching strands of her hair. "And how's that working?" I watched the waves for a moment before answering. "I've gotten really good at ignoring a nice view." She smiled, but it wasn't really a joke. "Same." We kept walking after that, slower now, and for the first time I started to notice something beneath the surface of our conversations, not just shared habits, but shared avoidance. We weren't just busy, we were hiding in it. After a while, she stopped and turned slightly toward me, her expression softer than I'd seen before. "Why did you really move here?" she asked, not casually, not as small talk, like she actually wanted the truth. I hesitated for a second, feeling that familiar instinct to give the polished version, the safe one. Then I let it go. "I think," I said slowly, "I was getting tired of becoming someone I didn't even like very much." She didn't interrupt. Didn't fix it. She just stayed there with me, in it. And that was the moment everything shifted again. Not into something dramatic, not yet, but into something heavier, something that mattered. After that night, things didn't suddenly become intense or complicated. If anything, they became clearer. We still texted the same way, quick jokes, sarcastic comments about clients, small observations from the day, but now there were moments in between where something real slipped through. And instead of brushing past it, we stayed there a little longer. A few evenings later, we took coffee down to the pier just before sunset. The sky was soft and pale, the kind of early April light that made everything look like it had been given a second chance. People moved around us, couples, runners, someone walking a dog that clearly had more energy than its owner, but it all felt distant. We sat on a weathered bench facing the water. For a while, we didn't say much. Then Olivia exhaled slowly and said, "I think I've been the reliable one for so long, I don't actually know who I am without it." I turned slightly toward her. She kept her eyes on the water. "I answer fast. I fix things. I stay calm. People trust me because I make everything easier." She paused. At first, it felt like strength. "And now?" I asked. She let out a quiet breath. "Now it feels like I built a life around being useful to people I don't even respect." That landed harder than I expected. I nodded slowly, staring down at my coffee cup. I kept telling myself I was being responsible, building something, getting established. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the lid. But honestly, I think I just got good at hiding in work because it gave me a reason not to ask whether I was actually happy. She glanced at me, just for a second. "That's bleak," she said. "Yeah." Also, very accurate. We both smiled a little, but it wasn't really humor. It was recognition. After that, the conversations changed again. Not all at once, not in some dramatic shift, but in small, steady ways. We stopped pretending certain things were normal. We started calling them what they were. Avoidance, fear, habits we had mistaken for personality. And once we saw it in each other, it became harder to ignore it in ourselves. A few days later, my biggest client decided to create a crisis out of nowhere. It started with a message marked urgent, which usually meant someone else had waited too long to do something and now needed me to fix it immediately. Then came the call, scheduled for 15 minutes, stretched into nearly an hour of vague direction, last-minute changes, and that familiar tone that said their lack of planning had just become my responsibility. In the middle of it, my phone buzzed. "Olivia, walk after dinner? I need out of my apartment." I stared at the message for a second while the client kept talking. Then another email came in. And another. I typed back, "Can't tonight. Swamped. Sorry." Her reply was simple. "Okay, good luck." No pressure, no disappointment, just space. For some reason, that made it worse. I worked until almost 11, ate standing at the sink, closed my laptop, then opened it again 10 minutes later like I didn't know what else to do with myself. At some point, I heard her door in the hallway. I almost stepped out. I didn't. The next morning, there was another message waiting. "You disappeared a little. You okay?" My fingers hovered over the screen. The automatic response came easily. "Yeah, just busy." I stared at it, then deleted it. Instead, I typed, "Not really." There was a pause. Then, "Same instinct over here, no judgment." Another message followed. "Coffee on your steps in 10?" She showed up exactly 10 minutes later, holding 2 mugs. No makeup, hair loosely tied back, wrapped in a light sweater against the cool morning air. We sat on the steps outside the building, the street still quiet. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I almost canceled on you yesterday, too." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because I had a terrible call, and my first instinct was to shut down and disappear into work." She gave a small shrug. "Then I realized that's basically the whole problem." I let out a breath. "Yeah." She nudged my shoulder lightly with hers. "We're both pretending to live near the ocean while barely touching life." I laughed once, shaking my head. That was unnecessary. It was accurate. It was. She turned her head slightly, studying me in that quiet, direct way she had. "I don't think either of us needs another person to help us perform being fine," she said. Something about that sentence settled deep. Because she was right. This wasn't about distraction or flirting or filling time. She could see the pattern in me, and I could see it in her, and for the first time it felt like maybe that wasn't something we had to keep repeating. After that morning on the steps, things stopped feeling accidental. Up until then, you could have explained everything as timing, 2 neighbors meeting in a strange way, getting along, filling quiet evenings. But now there was intention behind it, not spoken out loud, not labeled, but there. We started noticing each other's patterns more clearly and calling them out. A couple nights later, Olivia knocked on my door around 8. I opened it with my laptop still in my hand. She glanced at the screen, then back at me. "Tell me this is actually urgent," she said. "It kind of is," I answered automatically. She didn't move. "Is it urgent?" she asked calmly, "or is it one of those things where someone else failed earlier and now gets to borrow your night?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. She nodded once. "That's what I thought." For a second, I just stood there, feeling that familiar pull, the instinct to prove I was reliable, to finish the work, to not fall behind. Then I looked at her, and instead of explaining or justifying, I reached over and closed the laptop. The silence that followed felt bigger than it should have. "There," she said quietly. "That looked difficult." "It shouldn't have been," I admitted, "but it was." "Yeah." She stepped inside, holding up a paper bag. "Good, then this is a small victory. I brought food." We ended up sitting on the floor because I still hadn't bought a proper table. Takeout containers between us, legs stretched out, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet gaps. It wasn't dramatic, no big declarations, just two people who were slowly learning how to choose something different. At one point, while we were arguing about the worst client phrase either of us had ever heard, my hand ended up resting next to hers. Neither of us moved it away. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, almost by accident, then stayed. It was such a small thing, but it didn't feel small. There was no rush, no pressure behind it, just a quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was real enough not to need explanation yet. By the end of that week, I knew this wasn't just about not being alone anymore. Olivia had become the person who could see when I was slipping back into a version of myself I didn't want to be, and somehow, without trying to control anything, she made it easier to step out of it. And I was starting to do the same for her. A few days later, she showed up at my place again, but this time there was something different in the way she stood in the doorway, more focused, a little tense. "I need you to tell me if this is a terrible idea," she said. That introduction does not make me feel calm. It shouldn't. She walked in, set her laptop on the couch, and turned it toward me. The screen was filled with rough notes, messy, unfinished, but structured enough to show intention. At the top, in simple text, were 3 words: local, useful, real. I frowned slightly, reading. Underneath was a list: small businesses, community groups, a marine education center by the pier, an after-school art program, a conservation nonprofit I'd seen flyers for near the beach. "I've been thinking," she said. "That's always dangerous." She ignored that. "I'm tired of helping companies sound meaningful when they're not." She crossed her arms slightly. "And you're tired of doing endless work for people who don't respect your time." I looked at the screen again. "So what if we stop aiming at the wrong people?" she continued. "What if we build something for the ones that actually matter, but don't have the resources or the voice to reach people?" I leaned back slowly, letting the idea settle. It wasn't complicated. That was the surprising part. Design, strategy, branding, the same skills we already had, but pointed in a completely different direction, toward something honest. "You're talking about building something," I said. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "With you." There it was. Not hidden, not dressed up, just real. I looked back at the screen, then at her. The idea wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, it definitely wasn't guaranteed to work, but it felt right in a way my work hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't think this is a terrible idea," I said finally. She let out a breath she had clearly been holding. "Okay, good." "I think," I added, "it might be the first good idea I've heard in a while." A small smile appeared, but there was something softer underneath it, something almost like relief. That was how it started. Not with a big decision, not with some dramatic leap, Just a shared document, a quiet apartment, and the sense that, for the first time in a long time, we weren't just working to keep up with life, we were actually trying to change it. That idea didn't change everything overnight. If anything, it made things more real. Because once we said it out loud, once it existed between us, we couldn't go back to pretending our old routines were enough. We still had deadlines, still had bills, still had habits that didn't disappear just because we wanted them to. But now there was something else in the middle of it all. Direction. Over the next couple of weeks, we started making small, uncomfortable decisions, the kind that didn't look dramatic from the outside, but felt huge on the inside. I let go of a client I had been holding on to for months out of pure habit, the kind who always needed just one more revision, who treated my time like it was optional. Writing that message took me longer than I expected. Olivia turned down a contract extension she had already mentally committed to. When she told me, she just shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, but I could see it in her shoulders, the tension, the release. We didn't celebrate those moments loudly. We just noticed them and kept going. Most evenings we worked together, sometimes at my place, sometimes at hers, laptops open, notes scattered, coffee going cold between conversations. We tested ideas, wrote outlines, argued over wording, deleted entire sections and started again. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. And somewhere between all of that, something else kept growing, quietly, naturally, without either of us trying to force it. There were small moments. Her texting me from the other side of the wall, "Come look at this before I ruin it." Me knocking 2 minutes later, her laughing at something on my screen before I even explained it. My hand finding hers again without either of us commenting on it. It wasn't dramatic. It was better than that. One night, neither of us could sleep. Around 5 in the morning, I got a message. "Are you awake?" I stared at it for a second, then typed back, "Unfortunately, yes." A pause. Then, "Pier?" 10 minutes later, we were walking through a quiet town that felt like it hadn't fully woken up yet. The air was cool, the sky pale and undecided, somewhere between night and morning. The pier was almost empty. A couple of fishermen, one dog dragging a tired owner behind it. The ocean stretched out in that flat, endless way that made everything else feel smaller. We leaned against the railing with paper cups warming our hands. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then I let out a quiet breath. It's kind of ridiculous how long I lived here without doing this. Olivia smiled slightly, still looking out at the water. I know. No, I mean really ridiculous. 4 blocks away and I still managed to ignore it. She turned her head just enough to glance at me. You weren't ignoring the ocean, she said. You were busy pretending survival was the same thing as living. I let out a short laugh. Still rude. Still true. It was. I rested my elbows on the railing, watching the horizon shift as the light slowly changed. For a moment, everything felt simple. Not easy, not solved, but clear. I turned toward her, more serious now. I want this, I said. She looked at me, waiting. The project, I added. Then, after a second, you, but you first. Her expression changed in that quiet way I had started to recognize. Not surprise, not hesitation, relief, like something she had been holding back finally had a place to land. Good, she said softly, because I was getting tired of trying to say that in a more professional way. I smiled, shaking my head. Then I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't perfect, but it was real in a way nothing in my life had felt for a long time. No performance, no pretending, just clarity. Later, we sat on a bench near the end of the pier, her laptop open between us, the early light finally stretching across the water. We made a list, real names, real places, the first 3 organizations we were going to reach out to. It felt small, And at the same time, it felt like everything, because for the first time since I could remember, I wasn't just reacting to life, I was choosing it. We still had work to do, still had habits to break, still had moments where the old patterns tried to pull us back in. But now, when I looked at my days, I could see something I hadn't seen before. Not just tasks, not just deadlines, a direction. And when I looked at her, standing there beside me, the ocean behind us, the morning finally beginning, I realized something else. I hadn't moved to that town to find a better view. I had moved there to find a better life. And somehow, without planning it, without forcing it, I had found it. With her.